What does the big weekend that was in college football say about how we should see Nebraska now? We have some thoughts. Join us.
You are Locked On Nebraska, your daily Nebraska Cornhuskers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, and thank you for making Locked On Nebraska your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get podcasts and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code Locked On College for $20 off your first purchase.
All right, welcome in. Happy Monday, everybody. Hopefully you enjoyed your weekend. Connor Happer, 1620 The Zone. Connor Happer was The Zone, and Mitch Sherman from The Athletic, of course. Game week. Correct. Again. Get locked back in. I almost forgot what my name was and what my job was, but we're all recovering.
Bye week, that's okay. After the bye week, you're good.
Yeah, exactly. It was a really, really fun weekend in college football. The Big Ten puts forth their game of the year. Just as, you could say Alabama and Georgia was a couple weeks ago, Oregon and Ohio State was really, really good football on Saturday night. And I want to react to some of these things that we saw over the weekend, because I couldn't help but notice that there were Nebraska fans who started to sort of rethink some things after some results have come in over the last 2 weeks. Mitch, when you see the weekend, not just Oregon and Ohio State, but Penn State winning in overtime on the West Coast against USC, Iowa, clubbing Washington pretty good, Wisconsin clubbing Rutgers pretty good. What do you think as it pertains to Nebraska?
Well, if you were just looking for a carefree weekend of football viewing as a Nebraska fan, and you thought, hey, nothing going on with the Huskers this weekend, and I'm just going to sit back and watch and not worry about a thing. Well, I guess that's not really how it went. At least that was my view of the way that most Nebraska fans viewed the weekend. First, in the noon Eastern time slot, as you mentioned, you had Iowa taking Washington out back and putting a hurt on the Huskies. And then on the East Coast, you looked at Rutgers, which just came into Lincoln, and what do we say? Nebraska got a little fortunate to beat Rutgers 14-7 a week earlier. Well, Wisconsin just beat them 42-7 in Piscataway. So Iowa and Wisconsin are there on the Nebraska schedule. They're not front and center right now because they're at the end of the Nebraska schedule, but they're always in your mind. And I think people going into the middle of the season thought, all right, hey, Nebraska's going to get Iowa and Wisconsin on a little bit of a downturn when this season comes to an end. That may not be the case anymore.
Here's the thing. I don't want to say that these games take place in a vacuum, because they don't. Like, everything else that happens matters. But I'm not going to overreact to, I'm not counting Iowa as an automatic loss just because they beat Washington pretty good. I'm not rethinking Nebraska. Like, Nebraska still gets a win, even though they beat Rutgers by 7 and Wisconsin beat them by 35. So Nebraska is figuring out their formula to win football games as well. And so, you could look at it. I mean, if you thought that it was going to go just how it's gone based off of the first 6 games of the season, then you'd be looking at a pretty tough road. And it is going to be a tough road for Nebraska, but these games are just as winnable as they were on Friday. They're just as winnable as they were, on September 15th or whatever it might have been. Like, I'm going to do my best because I know how Nebraska wants to play. Like, I know that they're trying, not that they're trying to win by 1 point, but that's ultimately the goal at the end of the game. So I think they could kind of figure out a formula to do that. They've put that forth a few times. I can't sit here and be like, wow, the Wisconsin's kind of, unbeatable. Not that anybody's saying they're unbeatable. But I'm looking at it the same way I did a couple weeks ago. Forgive me. I'm just, I'm not going to overreact.
That's a very calm and measured and seemingly mature take. Usually what happens with those, because we have those kind of takes in the off season, like early in the off season, and then by the end of the off season, we've jumped off the cliff.
Yeah.
So I think what happens here and this is in a much shorter period of time, is we look at this and we try to say it's okay that Iowa and Wisconsin all of a sudden look better. It's okay that Illinois had to go to overtime with Purdue on Saturday afternoon. And I don't know, that kind of cancels out because you can be like, well, hey, right. Purdue took Illinois to overtime, but Illinois beat Nebraska in overtime. So how am I supposed to view this? Well, by the end of the week, whatever direction you lean, either you're just going to be totally fine with it, you're going to be back in your situation where you feel like Nebraska is going to roll through the end of its schedule when it plays, in some people's mind, a weaker version of Wisconsin or Iowa, or you are going to have totally gone off the deep end as we see in the offseason, and you're going to believe that the Huskers have to beat Indiana this week. Otherwise, you can forget about 6 wins. Well, maybe UCLA, but you can forget about 7 wins happening in this season because all of a sudden Iowa and Wisconsin are on like a rocket path to the top 10. What I think, one quick thought. What I think is that this is evidence that both of those teams are getting better. And that's as far as I'll take it.
And Nebraska has the same opportunity. They've only got 6 games that they've logged away as well, and they've won 5 of them. I'm sure many have heard the phrase, comparison is the thief of joy. I don't want anybody to have their joy stolen by the fact that all these other, on Nebraska's bye week, Iowa, looks impressive and Wisconsin looks impressive and they're still coming up on the schedule. And what do we do with USC if that's the case? Because, you could read their first half of the season and say, oh man, they've lost a whole bunch of these games close. Like, or what are they going to be like? But I think they look pretty good. They had Penn State on the ropes for the entirety of that game. So I just don't think you could look at the results and say, okay, this is what they are now. If that's the case, then you will have your joy stolen. So, Nebraska's going to have plenty of opportunities to pick up, 1 more win, 2 more wins, 3 more wins, 4 more wins, whatever it might be. And they are tracking to be on pace for what fans wanted them to be at the end of the year and what Matt Rhule said, what they wanted to be at the end of the year. I want to be relevant. I want to be relevant in November. And they have an opportunity against Indiana this coming Saturday to, stake their claim to relevancy again.
Yeah, I was going to hold this for the third segment of the show when we talk about Indiana, but I feel like it fits into this exact moment in the conversation. So what do you think the feeling is about Nebraska nationally this week as it goes into this game? Nebraska's 5-1, Indiana's 6-0. We've been talking about the Big Ten. We didn't even talk about Oregon, Ohio State. Obviously, Ohio State, in spite of losing that game, is still formidable and a college football playoff team and probably going to play Oregon again and not a team that Nebraska should be real excited to see in 2 weeks. But what do you think about the national vibe on Nebraska? So one Nebraska is not ranked in the AP poll this week. The Huskers sat 27th, 2 spots outside of the top 25 a week ago before the bye, and it seems reasonable that without playing a game, they're in the same spot. Indiana did jump up 2 spots, also had a bye, leaped ahead of Kansas State, which beat Colorado on the road in Boulder. They were tied for the 18th spot, and now the Hoosiers are 1 spot ahead of them. So I think we know how people are trending on Indiana nationally, but how are they trending on Nebraska? Nebraska this week in the voting was jumped by Army, Navy, and Vanderbilt. Now, I know without looking it up that has never happened in any week in the history of the AP poll, that Nebraska, without playing a game, got jumped by Army, Navy, and Vanderbilt.
That's right. That would definitely be a first. I would sign on to that. I'd say this, like, from a narrative perspective, when Big Noon is in Bloomington on Saturday, and when they get the big crew, it is going to be about the Hoosiers. It's not about Nebraska. Nebraska is the B storyline to this game, which I don't know, is kind of exciting. They're 3.5-ish point underdogs going into this one, so it's not like, it's not this far-fetched thing that they actually go out and win the game. But the story is Curt Cignetti, and the story is Curtis Rourke and what Indiana has done so far this year to get themselves to be the first team to be bowl eligible and to, maybe get to 8 or 9 or whatever, the playoff. I keep hearing people talk about the playoff with them. So Nebraska's not the story. I think that's a really great spot just from a narrative perspective, from a mentality perspective for this team to be in. Obviously, the Indiana game is maybe tougher than we mapped out at the beginning of the year, that Husker fans mapped out at the beginning of the year. But I get the sense that this team will be pretty good when no one's talking about them, because that's kind of the way that they operate.
Yeah. All right. So our message to you is we hope you enjoyed your bye week, and there was nothing that you saw on Saturday in the Big Ten or even outside of the Big Ten with Colorado. Colorado lost its first game other than the Nebraska game, played like a much better version of North Dakota State, like the same team, just with Power 4 players on the field, and Kansas State snuck out of Boulder with a 3-point win. But there was nothing that you saw on Saturday that should make you feel all that much different about where Nebraska's at in the big picture of this season. So we hope you can take that to heart.
All right, let's take a break. We will come back. We'll get to a few things when we return. What does the upcoming week look like for Nebraska, just like internally, not so much looking at Indiana, but internally. We'll discuss that when we return on the Locked On Nebraska podcast. All right, I want to take you a moment to tell you about LinkedIn. When you're hiring for your small business and you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role, that's why you got to check out LinkedIn Jobs. It has the tools to help find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. LinkedIn isn't just a job board. It helps you hire professionals that you can't find anywhere else, even those who are not actively searching for a new job. In a given month, more than 70% of LinkedIn users do not visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. 86% of small businesses on LinkedIn get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. Hire professionals like a professional. That's with LinkedIn. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Terms and conditions apply.
Okay, welcome back on this Monday of the Locked On Nebraska podcast. I'm Mitch Sherman from The Athletic. Connor Happer from 1620 The Zone is here with me. Good weekend for you, Connor. How did things go for you on the personal note with Nebraska on bye?
Just a lot of football. I really enjoyed it. A little baseball.
Football.
Yeah, a little baseball. This is mostly football. And some good weather. Like I mowed the lawn real short, got that fall.
We haven't talked about this in a while. How was your lawn?
Lawn talk is back, folks.
Yeah, it's fall. Is it still looking green, or what's the situation?
It's been a challenge to keep it green.
Hasn't rained. It hasn't rained.
Just doesn't rain around here anymore, but we've we've kept it watered for sure. I almost feel bad sometimes, but we keep it green.
I have much less motivation to keep it green in October because I know what's about to happen. So It always looks a little bit better. We mowed on Saturday also, and I was pleased that it didn't look as like ratty after the mowing. It'll be okay in the spring. I'm kind of just cashed it in for the fall.
Wow.
I'll put some winterizer on it before it goes to bed. It's still fine. Like it's fine. It's just, and I'll be happy about it again in April or maybe March.
So I didn't quit though, Mitch. Like I thought this was I'm
like half lawn guy. I'm very half-hearted. Like I get excited about it for like 2-3 months of the year, and then it gets hot and I just say forget it. I mean, I'm not like letting it die or anything. It's just it's fine.
I stayed on the grind.
Unmotivated. I got sandblasted out in the weather conditions on Sunday. 4 hours on the baseball field with the 13 and 14-year-olds, and I felt like I had dirt in my teeth, dirt inside my shoes. It was windy, as you said, very dry. So I'm still coming down from that.
Yeah, well,
it's hoodie weather though. You can see I have a hoodie on. We'll probably have a hoodie on most of the next 90 to 120 days, I'd say.
Yeah, we're gonna get sick of it, but for right now, it's actually kind of nice to throw on some sleeves and maybe even some pants. Okay, so let's look ahead at the week here. First of all, we should mention a little shout out here to Nebraska volleyball, who continues to be a wagon. Some magic at the Devaney Center over the weekend against Purdue to win in 5. Nebraska's going to be the number 1 team in the nation coming up this week, and they are, as usual, trending for some pretty good stuff and a deep postseason run again. But they'll of course have those barometer matches with Wisconsin that are still coming.
So, yeah, Huskers took down Purdue in a match that all the statistics said Purdue should have won. I watched that on Friday night, and it was some good sports drama. I will definitely say that. Purdue came to play at Devaney, and Nebraska gets out of there with the win, and then combined with Pitt losing to SMU. SMU has now beaten Nebraska and Pitt, the top 2 teams in the country, according to the pollsters. So expect the Huskers on Monday to jump Pitt and be number 1 and on track to be 20-1 when Nebraska goes to play Wisconsin on November 1st in Madison. So that's fun. That'll continue to be fun for Nebraska sports fans for the rest of this month and next month and into December. So the football Huskers, of course, took the weekend off from practice. We did get a Chasing 3 episode on Saturday morning, 10 a.m. debut, right as game day was on. So Matt Rhule, during the episode, he resigned from his job as the Nebraska football coach in front of the team. I don't know if you got an opportunity to watch the video. Strange they would break the news in that way. Did you catch that?
No, no. I've only heard bullet points, and I was very confused, and I thought I was dreaming. Could you explain this to me a little bit?
Yeah, so the week of the Rutgers game, the episode was all about the lead up to the Rutgers game. He went to coach the Raiders, the scout team, not the Las Vegas Raiders, but he moved over to become the coach of the Raiders. And of course, to do that, he had to resign for some reason as the Nebraska coach. And they played it, and then they interviewed a couple of guys about it who actually thought they said they thought it was real, that he was stepping down there on camera. Yikes. In front of the team at practice, at the beginning of practice one day. So really nothing all too substantive in this episode. Saw some of the Sue and Ndamukong Suh interactions with Nebraska before that Rutgers game, but highlights of the game, James Williams making sacks, things of that nature. But quiet weekend on the field, off the field. In recruiting, really everything was just kind of status quo for Nebraska through the bye week, which is good. And Matt Rhule will be in front of the media on Monday, a little earlier than usual, around 11 a.m. on Monday for your radio show planning purposes. Expect to hear from him earlier than the noon hour that we usually get.
Yeah, I'm curious what we'll hear from him today. I mean, one of the key things going, in his Monday press conference last week was say, hey, it's a bye that came at kind of the perfect time at this midway point. So we got to get healthy, and they've been a little bit banged up. And because of that, and they've won some games, they've found out, that they have a few guys who were not exactly factoring into starter minutes at the beginning of the season, who now are. And so now you have a little bit of added depth. So it'll be interesting to see how they play all that, starting this weekend against Indiana. But I'm curious to hear from him on the injury front and see how that's all shaken out over the last week.
Yeah, we should expect some updates on Tristan Alvano, Tommy Hill. Those are the two main injuries to track right now. I mean, there's some players who are out with some longer term stuff who potentially could come back this year, like a Turner Corcoran, but that doesn't seem to be trending in a direction where we're going to hear something here before the Indiana game or anytime soon. So Alvano, the kicker, that's a big one. Will Nebraska get its kicker healthy in time for this 2-game road swing when, all the points that you can muster are tremendously important? And then what happens with Tommy Hill when he comes back? He's a starter for sure in the secondary, but Sear Wright has, I think, earned the right to be also considered a starter. Does Marquise Buford move to play more of an inside position? Like, is he playing a corner position on the slot? Does that free you up with perhaps Malcolm Hartzog, who's been starting at safety, to be in more of a rotational position? I don't know. It's a good for John Butler and Tony White and the Nebraska defense to have, and something that will come into focus if, in fact, Tommy Hill is ready to go this week.
Yeah, I'm also curious, and I don't know how much we'll get to this because I don't know how much Rhule wants to go into, just like the game plan for Saturday. But like, how do you attack Indiana? Nebraska's used, a bunch of different personnel, and I'm talking about like people, not necessarily the way you line up, but like people, in for these different styles of games that they've played so far this year. So it'll be curious to see where they come out on like, hey, could this be, is this a space where Carter Nelson can have some success or something like that? Is this a space where you could get Ja'Cory Barney go? Like, I don't know how far we go down that line, but you look at the last 6 games of the season, there's some redshirt guys that are out there too. You got to have to manage that. So some of that stuff I'm really curious to hear today.
Usually the bye week is an opportunity to really get a lot of attention paid to the younger players on the roster. They'll have they'll be featured more in the practices. Nebraska did practice Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday last week, so I would expect that they gave the veterans, even in addition to the fewer practices and the weekend off. I think that the workload that those older players faced in the practices was toned down in order to give younger players and players who are redshirting. And you mentioned some of these redshirting players have got multiple games left. I'm interested to see on both sides of the ball, but I'm just thinking about the offensive side. If we see like a Keelan Smith or a Quinn Clark who get an opportunity to play in one of these games. I mean, the situation that makes it a little bit difficult is these next 2 games are road games, so you can take just 74 on the road, unless it's like the one designated road game. They used to have one designated road game where you could take additional players. I don't know that either one of these would be that game, or if that even exists anymore. But it's something we can ask Matt Rhule about. I do know they really like those young wide receivers. Malachi Coleman is another one of those young wide receivers who's redshirting, and I wonder after a bye if there's perhaps something in the works to get a player like that involved in, even if it's just in like a set or two. So something to watch and a reason to keep an eye on the travel roster when we discover that on Saturday morning.
Yeah, it gives you an opportunity to have some more concentrated plans for those guys. You know what you've done so far through the 6 games. You know how many you have left at your disposal. So curious to see what those plans will be like. And maybe we don't hear it, but it's more of a see it thing when it comes.
Yeah, I don't think he's going to come out on Monday and talk about how they worked the big tall freshman wide receivers into some sets in order to catch. They want to catch Indiana off guard with that. And look, you have to catch Indiana off guard because what Indiana's doing on both sides of the ball and on special teams, and just in the job that Kurt Cignetti has done to build this program in the months that he's been there, is truly one of the better stories in college football this season. And we're going to hear a lot about that this week and leading up to Big Noon kickoff. So when we come back from the break, we're going to talk about some of those matchups and start to get into it. I think this is really one of the more interesting matchup weeks that we've had, probably the most interesting one since Illinois, or maybe even Colorado for Nebraska. So we'll break that down and discuss what might be the most interesting matchup on the field Saturday when Nebraska goes to Bloomington. That is coming up next. Okay, Mitch Sherman here to tell you about Game Time. It's college football season. If you haven't noticed around here, the pennant races are over in Major League Baseball, and now it's League Championship Series time. The World Series is around the corner. You can still get tickets to Major League Baseball games if you are in one of the areas where there are games being played, or maybe you're a big fan of one of these 4 teams that's left and you want to travel, you want to see your team in action. Check out Game Time. It's an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball. It makes getting tickets easier and faster. Prices, even for these big games, tend to go down the closer you get to first pitch. So whatever you want to do this fall, if it's baseball, if it's football, if it's basketball, if it's hockey, if it's a concert, whatever's coming up, if it's hot and it's a big event, it's there on Game Time. I love that you can see flash deals. You can customize your own spot in the stadium. You can see views from your seat. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the app today. Create an account. Use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Download the app today. Game Time. Last-minute tickets. Lowest price guaranteed.
All right, welcome back. Connor Capper, Mitch Sherman with you. I love what you said right before the break. This week, it's such a fun matchup, and I love, as I've said this before in this show, Mitch. Like, I love talking about the game. I love when it's not about the other stuff and whatever. Now there will be plenty of narratives as we discussed earlier in every game.
Like the word of the season for Nebraska football.
Yeah. Every game seems to be a referendum in its own way, and I'm sure that'll be the case after the game. But this, it's a really intriguing matchup. So, Indiana has been pretty much impenetrable, like really good on offense. They have run it well. They have obviously passed it really well. Their quarterback has not turned it over very much. 14-2 touchdown to interception ratio. They usually are keeping their opponents. Talk about Indiana defensively, like they're keeping them kind of behind the chains a little bit, making them tough to convert on third down. Like it makes sense why they're 6-0 right now. Mm-hmm. With that being said, they have played Florida International, UCLA, Charlotte, Maryland, Northwestern, and then they played an FCS school, right?
Yeah, Western Carolina, I believe, is the FCS school. So none of those teams have a winning record.
I don't think of any of those teams are any good. Like, just point blank period. Not only do they not have winning records, but they're just, it's not like you could get fooled by it or anything like that. I just think they're no good. So Indiana will have to kind of prove that to everybody as well. I guess what's the thing that's maybe most interesting or catches your eye first about the matchup on paper?
I mean, everything about Indiana looks statistically good, but I do think that that's skewed by the schedule. And it's also skewed by the momentum and the confidence and everything that Curt Cignetti has done well in building this program. It's not like it's a house of cards, but nobody thinks that Indiana is destined to go 12-0 and play, let's see who Ohio State or Oregon, which one of those teams is going to be able to is going to get Indiana in the Big Ten championship. No, that's not what I don't think anyone is thinking that. But for me, like above all else, like what I think is potentially the most real about Indiana after 6 games is the offense. 200 yards a game on the ground, more than 300 yards a game through the air. Curtis Rourke, the Ohio U transfer, completing 73.8% of his passes. He's thrown for 292 a game. You mentioned the 14-2 touchdown to interception ratio. Indiana is converting more than 50% of its third down opportunities. That's number 1 in the Big Ten. So like this stuff, I don't care who you're playing. As long as they're FBS competition, 3 of these games are against Big Ten teams, 3 of the worst Big Ten teams out there, but they're still Big Ten teams. It's a real thing. And like Nebraska going on the road to have to face this, it's going to be a pretty charged up atmosphere. Indiana has announced that this game's a sellout. So I think that matchup of Indiana's offense against Nebraska's defense, especially when the Hoosiers go and try to throw the ball against what is the secondary is a strength for Nebraska, that to me is very, very interesting and intriguing to see how this plays out.
Yeah, I'll go even inside that. Like one thing that I'm already thinking about, maybe it's too early in the week to be thinking about this, but you got to get off the field on third down, right? I mean, they're pretty explosive. Nebraska hasn't necessarily historically done that very well defensively in the Tony White era. Everything else looks really good on defense, but Nebraska's usually had some problems against higher powered offenses getting off the field on third down. So you can't let them extend, like, right. The keys for Nebraska are always the keys for Nebraska. You want to possess it and you want to get off the field on third down and don't turn the football over. That's kind of the deal. It becomes even more important in a game like this where that offense can strike in a hurry. They offensively, Indiana is number 9, according to what I have in the country in third down success rate. So, wow. I mean, that they haven't played anybody, we can do that whole thing. We were kind of just talking about with Nebraska too, though, Mitch, like if we're going to do they're 5-1, but they haven't really beat anybody thing. Well, the Indiana's 6-0 and they haven't really beat anybody. So, Nebraska's strength of schedule has been a little bit tougher than Indiana's, what they've had to start with, but you see what I'm saying. So I don't want to discredit them really. But maybe there's more of a curiosity with them going into this game just because of what they haven't played yet.
My curiosity with Indiana is what happens when it gets punched in the mouth. I don't have the numbers in front of me as far as how much time, if any, that Indiana has been behind this year. I know the Northwestern game was close for a good chunk of that game, and then Indiana.
I think there was a moment in that game that they were down or it was tied later, and that was the first time all year. Like I think that was right. I don't quote me on that.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that Nebraska's the team that can punch Indiana. Well, that Nebraska can punch Indiana in the mouth. Will it punch Indiana in the mouth is a different question, and that's got to do with the start to this game. Indiana is the type of program, I think, that is you're going to want to weather the storm at the beginning, because they're going to come out with a furious burst of energy. And I'm sure Matt Rhule is going to talk to his team about this during the week. Go out and make it through the first quarter where you're not down by double digits. And look, I'm not making them out to be Ohio State, but like they're going to come out with so much, like the way that Nebraska came out against Colorado. Yeah. That's the kind of energy and momentum that Indiana is going to have at the start of this game. So weather that storm. And if you can deliver a punch to the face during that time, whether it's a big defensive play or you hit a big pass or whatever, then it becomes very, very much new territory for the Hoosiers. And I would like to see how they respond to a moment like that, where all of a sudden they're looking up, they're sitting on the canvas and they're looking up and they're in a spot that they haven't been this season.
Yeah. And remember, Nebraska's a kind of a defense where they want to keep it in front of them. And so that means to your point, Mitch, you kind of do have to stay in there a little bit because they're going to get their yards. I mean, where Nebraska has to really bow up is in the red zone and not allow them to score points and or at least at as high of a rate as they've been scoring points this year. I mean, they have quite the track record so far. So yeah, I'm looking at an analytics website right now. GameOnPaper.com, by the way, really good stuff from an analytics side. It just kind of compares it to. It's almost all green. I mean, all of it is green. For both sides. So that means they've both shown against some weaker schedules so far that these teams are both capable of having some success here. So Indiana's is very green, by the way.
Very, very green.
Very green.
Unlike my lawn. All right. Well, we're going to get way more into this matchup as the week goes on. Look forward to hearing what Matt Rhule has to say about Indiana and about Nebraska's bye week and everything that's going on in the Nebraska program on Monday. Today at his late morning news conference, we'll hear from Tony White, Marcus Satterfield, Dylan Raiola, and a bunch of Nebraska football players on Tuesday, and then we'll start making our way toward the end of the week. We'll get to our picks. We'll get to a mailbag. So exciting week ahead on the Locked On Nebraska podcast. Please stay with us. Please listen to us on the podcast listening platforms. Give us a like, give us a review, subscribe. If you're on YouTube, make sure you subscribe to the show on YouTube. And thank you for making Locked On Nebraska your first listen today. Now, go check out the Locked On College Football podcast. They're doing a great job to get you through this week 8 of an exciting season. You can find the link to that show in the description of this show, so there's no need to search. All of it is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.